Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast. I'm Shay Northrup, and today we're going to be talking about the OA, a series of unfortunate events, and we've got some television news for you. To start things off, one of the things that I found kind of interesting, I've got an article here talking about how apparently The Walking Dead has decided that they're going to tone down the violence a little bit. So, as we're all aware, last year, The Walking Dead put out their first episode of this newest season, and it was pretty gruesome. So Gail Ann Hurd, the executive producer, says that they do not have an agenda that they are pursuing. It's a show about moral and ethical choices, and that's something everyone can embrace. She acknowledged also, though, that due to feedback on the level of violence during the first episode that premiered, that they have been toning it down in the shows that they've recently been shooting. I'm not sure how I feel about this. I think this might be a bad move for them. I understand that this is a show on AMC and it is a show on television, but traditionally zombie movies and zombie films have always been filled with gore and violence, whether it be people versus zombie or people versus people. I think what they're really trying to do is I think they're going to just tone down the level of violence between people on people, probably, and keep the zombie violence pretty much the same. But I don't know. This is a show that's kind of become critically acclaimed because of some of its gore and some of its violence and that sort of thing. And I know they've definitely toned it down quite a bit from the comic books, because in the comic books, things get pretty serious and things get pretty gruesome. But in the show, however, not as much. So I don't really know what to think about this. I don't want it to become, super censored, but who knows? I really doubt that they're going to cut too much out of it. This is just something that I picked up. Another thing that's really important to note, moving to some news about FXX. Archer has recently moved for season 8 on FXX. If you're not familiar with the show Archer, you should really check it out. Although in recent seasons, I felt like it's been getting a bit repetitive. I know they did the Archer Vice thing with the, where they were deciding to sell cocaine so that way they could get their company back up and running. And I don't know. I feel like it's kind of fallen a little flat, but they've been renewed for 3 additional seasons, and they will be ending at season 10. So I do think it's actually probably time that they did stop the show in all honesty. The show's really good, though. The animation style is really cool, and I think it's cool that, they've moved to FXX, and let's see, how they do. Also, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia has just been renewed for a whopping 2 more seasons, so they've got season 13 and 14 planned. They just got through with their second episode of season 12, and it was quite a hit. Like, they've done sort of a record as a show being premiered on FXX. It's apparently the most watched original telecast on FXX, and it's pretty cool. I don't know if you guys have checked out It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but they started back in 2005, and it's been quite a ride since then. The show was first picked up by FX in 2005, and it just included Rob McElhenney, Glenn Howerton, Charlie Day, Caitlin Olsen, and in the second season they picked up Danny DeVito. And Danny DeVito partially makes the show. I think a lot of people agree that the show probably wouldn't be as popular as it is today if Danny DeVito wasn't on board. But when it started, they won a competition, if I'm correct, that was being held to make a pilot for a show, and they did it on a handy cam, like in their backyard. If you watch the original video, it's on Netflix, or it's on YouTube. You can check it out, and it's interesting. You know, like, it wasn't quite as funny as the show has become, and I'm glad that they were able to get a deal. Now, one of the reasons it's called It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is because it was originally going to be It's Always Sunny in L.A., but the producers were saying there are too many shows taking place in L.A. right now, so they moved back to their hometown in Philadelphia to create the show. And I think it's gone pretty well. Like, if you take a look at, like, the first season and you take a look at the most recent season, even if you just want to just take a look at season 11, you can see a dramatic change. One of the things that was kind of appealing about it when it first started was the actual handheld camcorder feel of it. It felt like a home movie gone wrong in a lot of ways, where we have these kind of angry and loud characters constantly shouting at each other in the bar, and then as it's gone on, each of the characters have kind of taken on a distinct form into themselves that has become iconic to their characters, and their character arcs are forever progressing or degressing in a sense, because all of these characters are kind of bad people, and as the show goes, it gets worse and worse. Now, one of the things that doesn't get worse, however, is the cinematography. We started with like a handycam, and the most recent season that I've seen, season 11, it looks like it's professionally done. Like, they've done a really good job. They have an episode in one of the seasons close to the end, like 9 or 10, that it's done in the style of Birdman with Charlie, called Charlie Work. It's probably one of the best episodes in the whole thing. And it's done all in the one camera following him the whole time kind of thing, like in Birdman. And it was done so well. Such a great show. And as it progresses, it just gets better and better, folks. Like, it started out really good, but as it's continued, it just develops. And I'm very excited to see what they're going to do next. They've actually said they've been asked when they're planning on ending it, and they said they're going to let it in naturally. Like, what they're going to do is when they run out of steam, and they know they've run out of steam, they're going to stop it. But as of now, we're going to be getting, season 12, 13, and 14, and I'm very excited. I'm very excited. It's the longest running live-action comedy series in history right now. So it will be tying with that. So the longest one is The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, and once season 14 is done, it will be tying with them. So we'll see if they get any more. I'm really excited. I know Deandra has her own show now, the lady Caitlin Olsen. I could talk about this show all day. It's one of my favorites. They just put season 11 on Netflix. If you haven't checked it out, you should go check it out, because I'm really glad they did. One of the things with the show, though, is that I usually wait for it to come out on Netflix, and sometimes I'll watch it on Hulu if I have access to it. And one of the things that, like, I always do is I end up watching the whole season in, like, a day. So it doesn't really last too long for me, but I've watched the entirety of the show more than once. It's really good. You should check it out. And I'm glad that they're getting more content. I'm glad that this is a show that has been recognized and it's enjoyed by a bunch of people, and that it can just continue to keep going. We are coming up on a break. When we get back, I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about A Series of Unfortunate Events, which is just premiered on Netflix. So stick around.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch, whatever it may be.
So in case you didn't know, Netflix has just released a series of Unfortunate Events TV series on their thing. It just came up in January 13th, so it's only been on for a few days now because I'm recording here on the 18th. And the whole first season has been uploaded, and it adapts the first 4 books of a series of Unfortunate Events. Now, if you're not familiar with the series of Unfortunate Events, it is a series of novels. There are 13 of them by Lemony Snicket. And that's not his real name. It's actually Daniel Handler's pen name for this series. Interestingly enough, just a little tidbit of information in case you actually wanted it. When he wrote another book before this before a series of Unfortunate Events called The Basic 8. And it was rejected from like 37 or so different publishers before it was finally picked up. And one of the publishers that he went to, they were like, yeah, we kind of like it, but it's really dark. Do you think you could write a kid's novel? And so he wrote this sort of Victorian Gothic mystery series about a group of children who their parents die in a fire. They get picked up by a really bad caretaker named Count Olaf. And it's pretty cool. Like, I remember I grew up on this series. I read them from start to finish while I was growing up. I remember when they were coming out. And I really enjoyed the sort of... It's very sarcastic, absurd, smart, and really... It pushes the idea that children aren't stupid. And I really like that. It kind of pushes the idea that, you know, there are a lot of adult themes and references in the books. And it's very dark. As a matter of fact, it was banned in several school districts. And I really enjoyed the kind of darkness of it. I've always kind of been interested in that whole Gothic era, the Victorian era, steampunk and that sort of thing. And that's kind of what a series of Unfortunate Events is. It's often compared to with Harry Potter, although I would say it's a little bit more like Rudell as far as absurdist and anarchistic points of views are kind of there. It's very, very dark, but also very humorous. And actually just kind of genius as far as writing goes. Now, it was, like I said, picked up by Netflix to be done, and I believe Neil Patrick Harris is one of the producers as well as one of the stars, and I'm pretty sure he performs the opening title song. Like, I don't know if you guys have seen Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog, but I can tell when Neil Patrick Harris is singing. Now, one of the things that's also kind of interesting to note, and last week I talked about it a little bit, Patrick Warburton is Lemony Snicket. Now, when I first, saw who it was, I actually thought, and I think I mentioned this last episode, I thought that it was the guy from Mad Men, and it's not. Patrick Warburton is the voice of Joe on Family Guy. He's also Kronk in Emperor's New Groove. He does a lot of voice work, and he's got a very deep and powerful voice. He does a lot of Adult Swim, too. Now, one of my biggest, I guess, let me talk about the good first, then we'll talk about the bad, because I have a mixed bag of feelings on this. I feel like a lot of people who read the books aren't as happy with this as people who are coming into it fresh. And even some of the people who I've talked to who, are brand new to the subject have a few issues with it in of itself. And I think this is going to be a problem we see in Netflix for a while. Like, while they're finding their footing, we'll talk about that too. Just a bit of a breakdown of what we're going to go over. Now, the first thing that's really good about this is I actually think that Neil Patrick Harris is doing a pretty good job, if not one of the best actors on screen. I also enjoy his little gang of misfit hench villains. I think that they're kind of funny and they kind of fit the tone really well. I feel like the henchmen are kind of in a situation where they're definitely not as scary as they were in the books, because in the books they were terrifying, and at least to me. In the show, they're a little bit comedic, and I kind of appreciate that a little bit. Like, I think that it works well. A lot of people were also complaining that the show doesn't feel very adult, but we'll get to that. The writing seems fairly well, and they do derive from the story. It's mostly intact. They do a pretty good job of sticking to the source material, at least from what I've seen. And I appreciate that because the movie didn't really do that as much. I actually really liked the movie adaptation of the books, but I think that the best parts of the books are there. They talk about one of the things that they did a lot in the books was describe the meaning of a word. So a person will say a word and they'll be like, in which that means this. And a lot of times the kids will just be like, yeah, we know what that means. But I think it was kind of interesting because a lot of times in the books, Lemony Snicket would say, in which case this means this, and it would usually be a definition of something like, he would say adversary, in which means Count Olaf, or, he wouldn't use the actual dictionary definition, but he would describe it using something that was in context if it was something he thought that the audience might not completely understand. I think it's cool that they've added that in. I think it's cool that they've kind of kept a little bit of the mystery and some of the backstory, and we know what's going to get to the VFD and all of this, and all of this secret organization stuff is there, and it's being alluded to. Now, I'm going to kind of talk about some things that I don't like. The show is very campy, and not necessarily in a good way. There are a lot of jokes that fall flat, and I'm not the only person that believes this. A lot of the jokes fall flat, and it seems a little too lighthearted, in my opinion. One of the coolest things about the book was the mystery. It was the lightheartedness. Not the lightheartedness, the darkness of the subject matter, especially for a kid's book. Here we have a story about a bunch of orphans whose parents just died, and now they're thrown into the clutches of a guy who's just trying to take their fortune. Like, it's handled very comedically and lightheartedly in the movie, or in the book, and I really feel like some of the character of the children is kind of gone, especially Violet. But I'm not going to complain about that so much. Uncle Monty, I think, did an excellent job in his role of things, and I think they got the right person for Justice Strauss. It has a pretty decent supporting cast. There's one henchman member that I'm kind of a little iffy on, but it also has a tendency to kind of drag in some areas, and that's kind of a bit of a problem. There's a couple episodes where it seems like they're either pulling things out a little too long, or they're just in the scene for too long, and it just kind of drags, and you just kind of want it to pick up a little bit. And I understand that they're doing 2 episodes a book, but I think, yeah, it's just not 100% working. One of the things that I really don't like about the show is that they keep throwing in references from other things that these actors have been in. I really feel like this is just a convolution of actors who were popular in TV, and they're all just kind of having fun and making jokes, and it doesn't really feel like they're taking the subject matter very seriously at all. For example, Will Arnett and Colby Smulders are the mother and father. And I don't want to give too much away, but they are kind of going through their thing while the children are going through theirs. And all of that stuff seems very hollow and very over-the-top comedic, in a bad way, where it's almost like I'm almost cringing as I'm watching it. Now, if you're not familiar with Colby Smulders' work, she was Robin from How I Met Your Mother. So it just feels kind of weird that her and Neil Patrick Harris are in the same thing. I feel like I'm watching How I Met Your Mother a little bit, and it doesn't feel like her acting and Will Arnett's acting are very like, haha, winking at the camera kind of stuff, and I'm kind of disgusted by it. Another thing that I noticed was in the background while Lemony Snicket was walking around in the sewers or whatever. Now, the guy playing Lemony Snicket is Joe from Family Guy, and the word quagmire is written on the wall on one of the signs. And I'm like, you guys got to be kidding me. Can we take this seriously? I really feel like A Series of Unfortunate Events deserves a little bit more of a darker, serious tone, even though there is some sarcastic, dry, and dark humor in it. I feel like some of this is a little too slapsticky. A perfect example of a joke that I felt fell flat was they're sitting around the table, and Uncle Monty is like, hey, let's go to a movie. And they're trying to get Count Olaf, who's disguised as another gentleman, to go with them because they want to keep an eye on him, because Monty knows something's up with him, and the kids know it's Count Olaf. And he's like, why would I go to the movies when I could sit here and stream long-form television off my TV? It's way more convenient. And that was a nod to Netflix. They've done this several times in the series. Like, within the 4 episodes I watched, they made that joke 3 times. And it was just kind of one of those things where, like, he looks over at the camera and's like, shout out to Netflix, and winks at the camera. Like he didn't flat out wink at the camera, but he might as well have. He looked over at us. And then there was another part where he's like, he calls up his henchman and he's like, I'm going to the movies. And the henchman's like, why? When you could stream straight from your couch on Netflix. And he didn't say Netflix, but he's like, why? When you could just stream from your couch. And I'm like, come on. I get it. Haha. But it feels misplaced, especially in something where we have serious subject matter like murder and orphans and dead parents. So, I don't know. Just kind of me nitpicking. It's one of those things, though, where like I'm actually legitimately interested in it, and I kind of want to continue because I want to see where they go with this. And I've heard from other people that they start to kind of lose that tongue-in-cheek stuff a little bit as it goes. Like, they start to lose a lot of the unwanted comedy as it goes, and it gets a little bit darker, and that's what I've heard, but I'm not 100% sure. I know it's kind of one of those things where most people really like it, but we'll see. I think it's got some flaws. I think it's got some little holes, and I think if given time, it could become better. And one of the things that I think like it's going to kind of boil down to with Netflix is Netflix, I think, is a little bit loose with their content. Like, yeah, just give us stuff. I think eventually they're going to have to get a little bit more strict on certain things and kind of tighten things up a little bit. And that'll probably come in time. All in all, I think A Series of Unfortunate Events is harmless. I did prefer the movie and I did prefer the books, but I think that this might be a cool series, and it's definitely something I'm going to follow. I give it 3 out of 5, 3.5 out of 5, something like that. So when we get back, I'm going to talk about the OA and give you my thoughts on that. So please stick around.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMc MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMcpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast. I'm Shay Northrup, and I'm going to be talking to you guys about a new show on Netflix known as The OA. Now, it first debuted on Netflix in December 16th. 2016, and I'm just barely getting into it now. I wasn't really sure what to expect going into this. The trailers were very vague. I felt like there must be something to do with aliens and science fiction, and it kind of has that feel. Something called the OA definitely is going to have that feel. I was kind of avoiding it for a little bit because I wasn't sure what to expect, and I was a little bit worried that I would be intrigued and want to see it, and that I would end up with something that just wasn't the kind of sci-fi or fantasy that I'm about. And I watched a couple episodes, and I have to say that this is definitely something I'm interested in. I'm very interested in this sort of thing. We'll talk about some of my pros and cons for it, and then I'll kind of discuss where I stand with it. Now, just a little bit of a tidbit of information. It's a science fiction supernatural with some fantasy elements, and it debuts on Netflix. So it's produced by Britt Marling, who's one of the main characters, and Zale. I cannot pronounce his last name for the life of me, guys. It's literally BATMANGLIJ. I'm horrible with names. I'm so sorry, guys. And so it's a series that consists of 8 episodes, all directed by Mr. Zale. And it's produced by Plan B Entertainment, which, by the way, I love Plan B Entertainment. It's pretty interesting. Like, they're not huge. They're not a huge production company, but they've definitely done a lot of things that I really enjoy, and they're usually a little bit more indie, Ooh, indie. Fancy. And anonymous content. Now, in the series, Marling stars as a young lady named Prairie Johnson. And so, she comes back after being missing for 7 years, and now she wasn't go by Prairie anymore. She calls herself the OA. And she comes back having sight after being blind before her disappearance. It's very interesting. They don't give you a lot of information to start with. And there's some very, very strong, powerful moments with her father and mother, who have taken her in. She's adopted. And they find her again, and there's very strong emotion where they don't want her because the government, the doctors, they want her to go to a psychiatric ward for a little bit so that they can evaluate her, because they all think that she was kidnapped. Now, the whole time you're kind of wondering, okay, so how did she get her sight back? How did she get here? Where is she from? What's going on? And they start to feed you the information slowly. Now, the first episode kind of starts out where we're being introduced to some of the side characters. So she puts together this kind of group of people that she's explaining her story to. And we get little tidbits of information where half of the story is told, it seems, about her past, and then the other half is moving forward. And I have to say, it's very intriguing. I am very intrigued with this whole thing. It's mystery, it's drama, and beautifully shot. It's not done quite like everything else. For example, A Series of Unfortunate Events was shot really well, but it had that kind of Wes Anderson feel. This has a very independent, low-budget feel to it as far as camera work goes. And it's kind of pretty and beautiful and that sort of thing. But one of the things that I do have to say is a little bit dull about the show itself is some of the scenes carry on for a little too long. Specifically, there was one where she meets a guy with a heart monitor thing, and he's listening to all these people's hearts in the room from a distance, and that scene just went on for too long. It's okay, get along with the story here. And I'm not the kind of person that likes to rush things. I watch movies from the 70s where they hold on shots forever and they hold on scenes forever, and I'm a fan of Quentin Tarantino, and if you know anything about Quentin Tarantino, the dialogue just keeps going and going. But in this case, they do need to wrap it up a little bit. Now, it's oftentimes compared to Stranger Things as either favorably or unfavorably. It has kind of a mixed bag. The ratings on this, and don't ever trust IMDb, 8 out of 10 on IMDb, yeah, just discard that. And then 72% on Rotten Tomatoes. And it seems like a lot more critics are enjoying it as opposed to audience members. It's kind of a split. Some audience members love it and some hate it, and some are just on board because they just need to know what happens next. And I kind of feel it, I need to know what's going on. Now, some of the characters are supposed to be in high school, and some of them I buy that they're in high school. Others, I'm like, what's a 30-year-old or 27-year-old doing in high school? It's a little ridiculous about how old one of the characters looks, considering. Also, there's a really cool scene with a Rottweiler. If you like dogs, I think you'll enjoy it. But all in all, I think I like the OA. I think of all the shows that I've been reviewing lately and all the shows that I've been watching, the OA is definitely one that I want to put on and just finish. I want to know what's going on. And I've heard that the ending is a little bit of a letdown, but we'll see. I might get in on that a little bit later, but it was really interesting to me. I think another thing that kind of maybe ruined a little some of it and made me kind of want to make it go a little quicker was because I was trying to get to bed. I was also watching it with some friends who came in a little bit late. They saw the, second half of the first episode, and then the second episode. So they were very confused about what was going on. It's a little bit confusing, to be honest. But I'm very excited to see where it goes. I think the girl's story is very compelling. And I know it can be slow at moments, but I think the mystery makes it worth it. And I hope it doesn't let me down. So I say check it out. See if you enjoy it. It's definitely something worth giving a try. I definitely like it better than I like A Series of Unfortunate Events, although I'm probably going to finish that as well. So that's about all the time I have for the show today. This has been the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast. I'm Shay Northrop. You can find us on Stitcher, SoundCloud, iTunes, and GoldenStateMediaConcepts.com. Next week, I'm going to be talking about the show Crazy Head and a few other things that have been going on in television right now. So please listen up for that.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts podcast network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMc to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts podcast network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.